Our top story this hour, the rampant protests in France. It's been a wild past couple of days in the French capital as the yellow vest protests were reported on recently have now turned violent. Multiple people from civilians to journalists have been injured in the chaos. In Paris, on the ground with the latest is RT reporter Charlotte Dubenskij.
As you can see, they're sounding their sirens here just on the Place de la Concorde as you go towards the National Assembly. The thing that they're unhappy about is a change here in France that was implemented 2 months ago, whereby hospitals now decide which ambulance service in France will collect patients, and the drivers are concerned that that could threaten their jobs in the future. Now, this is just the latest in a stream of protests that we've been seeing here in France, particularly over the last few weeks. With the very visible movement of the Gilets jaunes. They've been out for 3 weekends on the trot now, with protests descending into chaos here in Paris, and it looks like those protests are set to continue. Some have described the violence in Paris on Saturday with burnt buildings, burnt cars, graffiti and smashed shops and looting as some of the worst violence that France has seen since 1968. Well, President Macron returned home to France after the G20 summit in Argentina on Sunday morning, and he went to assess some of the damage, and he wasn't given a warm welcome. Well, President Macron also held an emergency meeting on Sunday with members of the cabinet. He's tasked the Prime Minister with holding discussions with political leaders and the Gilets jaunes movement to see how they can appease those protests. He also asked the Interior Minister to make sure that the security services are ready for any further mayhem. And it's also been mooted the possibility that France could declare a new state of emergency just a year after the last one ended. Well, who are the Gilets jaunes? They're a movement, a social movement that started just a few weeks ago, initially over the high cost of taxes on fuel here in France. But since then, they've progressed to being a social movement. They're unhappy with things such as a high unemployment rate here in France, as well as the high cost of living. And they're set to continue their protests with yet another demonstration expected to take place on Saturday here in Paris.
With the demonstrations in France, we're now joined by a live panel to discuss. Former UK Member of Parliament George Galloway and political commentator Steve Malzberg. Gentlemen, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Morning.
Good morning.
Well, first I want to talk about what some of the residents in France are actually protesting. George, we understand the basis of these protests are because of the high fuel prices, but what are the specifics actually? I mean, how much have they gone up? And is this because President Macron is hoping to discourage people from using diesel as a result of environmental concerns?
Well, as one British Prime Minister, Harold Macmillan, once put it, it's not just one damn thing. It's one damn thing after another. Its proximate cause was the cost of fuel, but it has rapidly snowballed into a protest about everything, the state of everything, the way in which the austerity neoliberal economics has forced the common people to pay for the excesses, even crimes of the richest and most powerful people in France. In that sense, it comes out of the same milieu as Donald Trump came out of, as Brexit came out of, a sense amongst the public that things are not right and the people who made them wrong are not the people who are being asked to pay the price. This is not a cheese-eating surrender monkeys. as they were once described. The French are a revolutionary people, and as you can see there, they take to the streets with a gusto that leaves everyone else open-mouthed. Although I may make the point that when this happened in the Ukraine, the Western governments rushed in with money, diplomatic and media support for it. Lawlessness is good for the Ukraine. It's not good for France.
Well, Steve, many protesters say that it's leaving those living in the rural and semi-rural areas who are basically bearing the brunt of these protests. I mean, they're saying that they don't have any access to things like a metro or even an Uber as others do in big cities. So where does the French government sit in all of this? There have already been, a series of resignations, and Macron's popularity has fallen to 26%. Where do you see this going?
Well, the Republican or center-right party in France has called for a referendum, although they've not been specific on exactly what that referendum would say or be about. I think it's good to have something come onto the ballot, some emergency vote on some kind of direction for the country. What's going on now, it's interesting, I don't know how many times I've heard the word protest. It's not a protest, they're riots. And these are commonplace. You only have to go back to May. Okay, before these Yellow Jacket riots, go back to May Day when they rioted. There were 1,200 people clad in masks and hoods and black, and I think they're called the Black Bloc. They're anarchists, and they just did everything you're seeing now. They lit cars on fire, they bashed buildings and windows, attacked police, same exact MO, which leads me to ask the question, yes, there are people suffering in France for all kinds of reasons, economic reasons, social reasons, but how many of them are actually doing what we're seeing here, using hammers and aerosol cans and bolts against police? This has to stop. This is not a way to bring about change in a country like France. This has to stop, and Macron has to get tough, declare the state of emergency, and end this.
That's a great point, Steve. And George, there were reportedly copycat demonstrations in Belgium over the weekend. Are you expecting to see similar protests from other European countries unless something is done?
Well, it's very funny. What Stephen just said there is exactly what we were saying about Ukraine, and people were saying the precise opposite about it then. This is not a group of anarchists. Of course there are anarchists there. As a matter of fact, there's a considerable number of people just as right-wing as Stephen on this demonstration. This is a mass demonstration of left and right. This is a mass demonstration of many hundreds of thousands, weekend after weekend after weekend. Trust me, no anarchist group is capable of mobilizing that kind of street power, such that a state of emergency, which I suppose the Bourbons declared just prior to the French Revolution, is now on the order paper. This is a revolt against austerity, against the making of people who did not do the crime, who no longer wish to do the time.
So you do see other people coming, you do see this happening in other places, George? That was my question to you.
Yeah, I do. It's already, as you just said, I don't need to repeat it. It's moved to Belgium, and it may move further still. And by the way, on the question of the police have declared this day that they support the demands of the demonstrators. So Macron, who's looking a much smaller man than he used to, might find his own police force switching sides in this confrontation.
And now, amid all the chaos, as you mentioned, George, all eyes are on the President Macron, and elections aren't until 2020. But Steve, do you think Macron has anything to worry about? I mean, we know Macron initially campaigned against populism. Do you see France turning into the next Italy and maybe shifting gears?
Yeah, no, I absolutely do. And let me make it clear, there are people who are suffering, who are protesting. And I don't doubt that for a second. But I don't think they're the ones smashing the windows, burning the cars, and blocking roads from people who need help. I think there's a line that has to be drawn between those kinds of actions. In 2005, we had riots because of so-called economic injustice as well. Again, it was the same thing. They like to protest a lot in France, but riots cannot stand. And yeah, I think Macron is facing a whole lot of trouble here if he doesn't get things under control. A gas tax where, you know, where people can't even afford their cars, a gas tax to fight global warming is not the smartest thing. It's the socially acceptable thing to do, maybe for the elites, but not for real people on the ground. That's why in this country, when you ask about the top 10 concerns during a political campaign, global warming or climate change doesn't even rank. And I'm sure it doesn't rank in France right now either. So he's got to get more in touch. There have to be talks, but rioting cannot stand and cannot lead to change, or you're opening up a Pandora's box.
Great points, gentlemen. Thank you so much, Steve Malzberg and George Galloway. Thank you.
Thank you.
And one of the multiple journalists injured over the weekend in these violent demonstrations in France was none other than RT's very own Peter Oliver. He joins the show now to talk about the ordeal. So, Peter, how are you feeling?
Well, ordeal's a little hard, but thank you very much, Natasha. I'm feeling pretty good. All I managed to do was we were reporting during the melees that were going on. One of your contributors just then pointed out that it was a riot. I would say it was a very violent demonstration at the time, spilled over into the full-blown riot. And during one of those little things, we'd finished doing a live hit. We were leaving the position because we were being tear-gassed out of there. And one of the police officers decided I was some kind of threat, shot me with a rubber bullet in my left ankle. Thankfully, my boot took most of the damage there, so I've just got a very colourful bruise. So
glad to hear that, because we heard that there was a possible bone fracture, but that's not the case, thankfully.
No. I went for an X-ray yesterday. Don't worry, everything is fine. No broken bones. However, I mean, if we do look at some of the other injuries that some journalists sustained, including our colleague from RT France, Luc Ligier, he was hit by what we now understand to be a fragment from a grenade, a flashbang grenade that was fired. I mean, he suffered an awful injury to his jaw. I believe that required some either stitching or certainly some serious medical care. He was rushed away to the emergency room, posting a brave picture of as he was leaving on his way to the hospital there. But ultimately what this was, though, is it was always going to happen from the very start of the day, Natasha. It was never going to end anything other than violent, and a lot of that and a lot of the responsibility for that has to lie with the police force, from my opinion.
So Peter, in all your years of reporting, have you ever experienced anything like this, of this magnitude?
Well, I mean, in terms of reporting from places that have turned into full-blown riots, and from the revolution in Egypt in 2009, the riots that followed, the austerity that was levelled against Greece for years and years. Yeah, it's up there with all of those things. It's also up there with real civil unrest that led to a revolution in Kyrgyzstan that I was able to cover many years ago, almost 10 years ago now, I believe. It was very, very rough. There were times where I was thinking, well, the standard thing is you think yourself somewhat invincible if you're the press in amongst these situations. You realise you're not, but you have to understand, or you have to believe yourself somewhat invincible to be able to stand there in front of a camera where things are going on behind you. This was one of those very few occasions that I've been in the middle of these things and thought, I'm in danger right now. This is not safe in the slightest. And that's been shown in the amount of people that were injured. And I include the police in that as well, the amount of police that were injured as well. One thing I'll tell you is I can't believe how quickly 4 men can overturn a BMW X5, as I saw on just off the Champs-Élysées on Saturday afternoon. Very quickly they were able to turn that over and set it on fire. Ultimately, though, what the protests are about goes a little bit to the side when it comes to just how violent they've been. I mean, I spoke to many police officers on Saturday who were telling me, no, but keep this between you, yourself, and the doorpost, but we kind of agree with it, because ultimately what they're talking about doing is making it, and I'm going to probably fail here at trying to calculate this into American, but to make a gallon of petrol cost around $7. Now, I believe the average price of a gallon of petrol in the US right now is around $4 if you're in California. So obviously that's a huge increase. They don't want to see that. they're against that. They're against these cost of living rises that are in there, for the most part, certainly. But there was a real failure as well on the police's behalf. They were more willing to allow things to continue and sit by the sidelines and fire tear gas and flashbang grenades into the middle, and plastic bullets, as I found out, into the crowd, as opposed to actually do the kettling type of thing that you would see perhaps here in Germany. Certainly you would see that here in Germany and in the United Kingdom as well, where I've been in these situations.
Yeah, a lot still unfolding, but Peter, we are so glad that you're safe and sound.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.